Can people hear me? Can you hear me? Yes? Good.
Yes, well, I can hear you
Good.
very well.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to speak. I've spoken several times at the Linguistic University, always with pleasure and interest. And I'm very happy to continue with this tradition. What I want to talk about today, I'm going to divide into three parts. I will try to speak very clearly because I'm not using PowerPoint, and I will articulate and explain words when I think that's necessary. But I have three parts to the lecture. The first is a bit of historical background, very short. The second is the starting of the changes towards modern society, modern ways of life. And for many people in Britain, and especially for women, that change centers around the post-war decades after the World War, and particularly the 1960s. And then in the third part of the talk, I will make some comments about the present situation and perhaps give some of my opinions about the present situation. And I'll try and leave a short time at the end so that there are questions. If somebody would like to ask questions, I'm very happy to address those, comment. So firstly, some historical background. If we're thinking about the position of any group in society, but especially women in society, we're thinking about the relationship between social customs, the ordinary ways of life, religion, religious views, and the legal system. And you can't begin to understand the present conditions for women without recognizing the interaction of custom, of religion, and in law over many centuries. If we take first the ordinary social customs, they have been based in Britain, as in most places, on assumptions about the natural difference between men and women. That is, that social structures traditionally are founded in beliefs about difference. And sometimes this difference between men and women is described in the English expression by separate spheres. This is a social term that to indicate that naturally, I put naturally in quotation marks, naturally, men and women differ, and therefore they have different social positions. But that custom, those traditional beliefs, are of course tightly connected to religious beliefs, and particularly in what are called the Abrahamic religions, the three religions of Jewish, Islamic, and Christian, which all share belief in the notion of God as male, as the Father. And in the Christian religion, belief in Christ as the Son. That is that the way of belief which is so ancient and deep is structured around the difference of men and women. And those differences are symbolically embedded in the imagery of the God. And this has meant that in law, the practice of marriage as an institution designed for the upbringing and care of children is not just a social arrangement, but has carried the status of being holy, of being part of a natural God-given order. But that God-given order is clearly hierarchical and has placed men above women in many social contexts. And the most obvious of these is the position of the priests within religion, who, until very recently in some religions, have been all men. Now, you know these things, but I'm trying to indicate that there is a very deep historical background to talking about the position of women. To expand on English law, traditionally, up until the late 19th century, that is, until 150 years ago, women in law were treated analogously as if they were property. That is, that in the marriage ceremony, in the Anglican Church, the words traditionally of the woman to the man when she says, "Yes, I will be your wife," the words she uses are that I will honor and obey her husband. And it's a very important shift that this has changed. And when I come to the present, the new words that are used, instead of to honor and obey, are to love and to cherish. The word cherish is a word to take, to live carefully with somebody, to treat somebody as precious. You cherish something that you really value. Now, the connection between women and property is that traditionally, until 150 years ago, when women married, if they had property, it went to the husband. And in the marriage relationship, the woman could not enter into legal arrangements. She could not legally deal with what was her money. She couldn't make contracts with people. She can't buy property. She doesn't own things. Rather, everything is with the agreement of the husband. And this put women who did not marry in a very anomalous situation. By anomalous, I mean a situation that was not somehow natural. It didn't fit into the order or the scheme of things, because a woman who didn't marry didn't hand over the decision-making about property to a man. But the treatment of women in marriage was, in law, I say in law, in practice, of course, they were treated well and they were treated badly, depending. But in law, the relationship was the same as children in a marriage. The woman is dependent on the will of the husband. And because of the religious standing of marriage, it was very difficult to end marriages. Divorce was very difficult. And as you will know, that one of the crucial developments in British history is the development in the 16th century with Henry VIII, the King, Henry VIII, whose wish to change his wife caused a complete constitutional change of the position of the church and the law in Britain. Right, let me jump forward to the 18th century, when we have the period of criticism of traditions, and an argument that the way society is organized should be based upon reason rather than upon custom. This is the period known as the period of enlightenment. And that period culminates, comes to a head, it reaches a climax with the French Revolution, 1789. And that is associated with the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The idea that human beings, by virtue of being human, have certain rights. And the Declaration of the Rights of Man raised the issue, does it include or does it not include the rights of women? And indeed, the new French arrangements after the revolution excluded women from political power. But you get in England in the 1790s, in 1792, the first major statement by a woman declaring that women should share human rights fully with men, that there should be no difference. All people are human, they all share rights. And this book is a very famous text regarded in the English-speaking world as the foundation of modern feminism. It's the book by Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft. A book called Vindication of the Rights of Women. The classic. And this and other texts in the 19th century put on the agenda of political society what is called the woman question. And this is very much in parallel to what happens in Russia in the Tsarist 19th century, that the issue of the status of highly educated, middle-class women becomes a big political issue. That is, that there is a close correlation between women wishing to get an education and women struggling or seeking to acquire political and social equality. And this continues. And it's true for Britain and it's true for Russia in the 19th century. But the Victorian period is also notorious, that is, famous in a bad way, notorious, famous in a bad way, for what is called the double standard. That is, at one and the same time, men treat women as idealized objects, as the virgin, and at the same time, they treat women as inferior objects, that is, the prostitute. And this double imagery of the woman as both ideal and as despicable, as good and bad, is a very important feature of the arguments that women make in the 19th century for a change. That is, that the double standard exposes the inconsistency, the lack of logic, the immorality of the male position. Now, changes begin in the second half of the 19th century in England. There are first changes to divorce, but more importantly, there are changes to the ownership of property. And a new legislation passed by government in 1882, the Women's Property Act, gave women the right to gave married women the right to own and sell property and to enter into contracts. And this step of giving women the right, not equally with men, but sort of equally with men, to own and sell property, establishes, exemplifies, illustrates the way in which women's position is bound up with their economic independence. There is no equality, there is no freedom of action without economic equalities and economic freedoms. And this is very clear in the history of women's position. But at the same time, this is a major shift in English law. But it's a shift that affects middle-class women, women with property. The great majority of women are working women who do not have property. But beginning at the same time, 1870 sees the first woman to have a full medical education, become a doctor of medicine. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, 1870, became the first English woman to take a medical degree. And there are women's struggles centering around medicine, and particularly the spread of what are called contagious diseases. And this is a euphemism. Contagious diseases is a euphemism. That is a more polite term for venereal diseases, the diseases communicated by sexual contact. And that is a big issue for women. And you can see how these issues about ownership of property, medical issues, are issues which are extremely emotional. And the issue of women's position becomes very emotional in British society, leading to a large group of women at the end of the 19th century and just before the First World War, called the suffragettes. And these are women who are committed to actively attempting to get political representation for women. And they do all sorts of aggressive acts, and a number of them spend time in prison. But they succeed. In the end of the First World War, Britain gives women the political vote, though only women over 30. And it's in 1928 when all women over the age of 21 are given the vote, along with men. So that the position of women shifts politically along with the achievement of a democratic political system, democratic in the sense that each adult person is given a vote. And this extends to women. But there is resistance to these changes, and we can come back to the reasons why there should be resistance. For example, the universities of Oxford and Cambridge give no degrees to women, do not have official women students until the 1970s. When I was a student at Cambridge in the late 1960s, there were women students, but they didn't belong to the same colleges as I belonged to. I lived in an all-male environment. Now, let me get to the changes. Things I want to say get better. What most changes is the pattern of work. During the 20th century, women, educated women, not just working class women, but educated women, moved into employment. Secretarial, but also education, teaching, and what are called in English the caring professions. The caring professions, nursing, child guidance, psychological therapy, and so on. And these educated women form a powerful political group arguing for equality of treatment in all spheres. And their campaign for equality begins with pay. How much are they paid? And it is a fact that until for much of the 20th century, women were systematically paid less for doing the same job as men in England. And the first equal act of Parliament, the first legislation to explicitly say there must be equality between men and women, was an act over pay. But the issue of pay hasn't gone away, and there are still areas where women are paid less. Another issue was whether there are certain occupations that are particularly suitable for women, caring for children, obviously. And the other dimension which gradually changes and continues to be the major issue is how to provide care for children. Is it the specific job of women to do this, or does society have a duty to make it possible for children to be cared for while enabling women to continue to work? And this has become a very big issue, the issue of providing child care, providing a period of leave and maternity, but guaranteeing that women will keep their jobs. There were many occupations earlier where if a woman became pregnant, that is, had a child, she lost her job because the employer didn't want to pay for somebody who was not, in fact, working for a period of time. So these issues are very live, and they're very much to do with the day-to-day administration of social relations. The other famous event that happens in the early 60s is that there is the pill. The pill is the pharmaceutical project which enables women to control their reproduction in a more systematic way than any other previously available way. There were many previous ways, of course, but the pill is transformative in terms of the feeling that women have that they have a choice in terms of having or not having children. And that sense of having a choice is, of course, fundamental to the modern consciousness of women, that they are not naturally given a role in society, but instead they have a choice about which roles they will play in society. These changes taking place after the Second World War and in the 1960s come to a head at the end of the 60s with a new self-consciousness among many women about issues of equality. And this is what is called second wave feminism. First wave feminism was to do with getting political rights. The first wave. The second wave is getting equality. And this has led to, since 1970, continuous pressure in the political sphere to advance the position of women in society. And currently in England, there is what is called the Equal Opportunities Act of 2010. This is the framework which an act of parliament, legislation, to require equal opportunity for men and for women. And also it includes other groups, social groups, people disabled and so on. But I'm talking about women now. Feminism, that is, there's a legal shift in society of very significant proportions, which lays it down as normal that there should be equality, and provides some ways of enforcing that norm. How far it is put into practice is, of course, can be discussed, but it is there as a framework. Now, feminism becomes very prominent as an issue among educated women. And I understand feminism as a position which thinks of the differences between men and women as fundamental in all social relations. That is, it's not just one of those things which structures the way we live, but it's fundamental to the way we live. And the feminist view is that because of that, social relations have always been biased in favor of men. And the feminist position is that bias in favor of men should be removed. That is, it's an argument that traditional societies have all been patriarchal, arranged hierarchically under a father. And feminism intends to break that pattern. But associated with feminism are, following from this kind of argument, you get large differences that you'll be familiar with, particularly the issue of gender. The word gender comes into use at this time. And the word gender is used to indicate that differences between men and women are social and cultural, not natural and biological. So gender is a way of talking about difference as something that can be changed because it's not natural, whereas biology would appear to be something that cannot be changed. And hence you get in universities gender studies and so on. The feminists themselves are of many different kinds. They themselves have had big debates about different positions. For example, there are those who argue that all people are basically similar, that we all share the same capacities, more or less. Of course, we differ. There are individual differences, but there are no large differences between men and women. But there have been many feminists who have argued that women are different and have special strengths that men do not have. Special strengths of, particularly of caring, of reacting in ways that are more supportive of social relations, whereas men are more aggressive. That's one argument. There's also the argument within feminism that the campaigns, feminist campaigns, have been dominated by articulate, white, middle-class women, educated women. And they have not paid attention to the position of working women, black women, women of other color, of different colors. That divides feminism. And of course, they also, feminists, have had to face what is called a social backlash. The word backlash is when you get a movement in society, a campaign for something, which instead of succeeding causes a reaction against it. It causes people to turn against it. And it's often, feminism has been the source of a backlash. Now, let me come to the situation now. I've been moving into the present situation. We have in England, in Britain, I keep trying to be careful whether I say England or Britain, because laws are different in Scotland. But essentially now I'm talking about Britain. There is a social and legal framework of equal opportunities. It is accepted in principle. But there is the question, how far is this equal opportunity in fact achieved? And how far it is achieved is very dependent upon the provision, the expensive social provision of maternity and child care facilities. Facilities for caring for children. And there are big social and political differences between those who think that the care of children is primarily the woman's concern, and those who think that society has an obligation to create institutions so that women also are able to continue working in their professional activities. But the situation for women in terms of security of employment during maternity, that is while they're having a child, and the provision of childcare has greatly grown in Britain. But feminists would say it's got a very long way to go. Women have become very visible in public, in many occupations. It's a fact that in British universities, there is now a majority of women students. There are more women students than male students. It is the case that Oxford and Cambridge now treat women equally. give them degrees in the same colleges as men. This happened, the first Cambridge college to allow women into a man's college happened in 1972. There are, in the public sphere, very obvious women who are high achievers, women with very high visibility. Politicians, Britain has had 3 women prime ministers: Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May, and Liz Truss. Though many people would say that Liz Truss, who lasted 40 days, is not much of a recommendation. There are women in sport very visibly. You may remember that in Women's European Cup in 2022, the English women's team won the cup with the champions. The English women's team are known as the Lionesses. The Lionesses. And these young, brilliant women have had an enormous impact on public perceptions of what women can do. And of course, women enter into sports of all kinds now: boxing, football. For a time, the fastest person to sail in a boat around the world was an English woman. If you sail around the world by yourself for 71 days in an open boat, nobody can turn around and suggest that you don't have capacities that are unique to men. Another area where women are very strikingly present is in the church, in the English Anglican Church. The first woman bishop was appointed in 2015. And there are now 7 women bishops in the Anglican Church. Where I live, up in the northeast of England, near Newcastle, the local bishop is Helen Ann Hartley, a woman. And there is a prediction that soon a majority of English priests will be women. Now, this, of course, divides the Protestant churches very much from Catholic and Orthodox traditions. So that the position of women have gained in the English-speaking world is a source of difficulty for relationships between different churches around the world. In business, there are also women in the top positions. One, for example, runs one of the major water companies that supplies water. Another is the chief executive officer of a pharmaceutical company, are women. But there is much discussion about whether or not there is what is called a glass ceiling. A glass ceiling is a roof that you can look through but can't get through. And there is discussion whether women are actually kept down and away from top positions. Whether there is still a culture at the top level of assuming that only men can do the job. Well, let me just make a few comments about what I observe. I would say that what I've seen in recent years is a new self-assertiveness and confidence among women. It's very visible that many women now take for granted that they should have equality, and that this equality should be visible. And the question is, how far does this situation, which women think should be normal, how far does it actually spread through society? Is it just found among middle-class people? And how far does it extend into working-class culture? That is, the way women's self-assertiveness and their sense of confidence is not separable from the sort of social world in which they live. But in universities, you would never hear, for example, in universities, you would never hear jokes against women. But if you sit on a train coming out of the city when workers go home, you will hear jokes about women. That is, both exist. There's also the issue of the public appearance of women. And dress has become a very controversial area. The feminist would say that how a woman dresses is the woman's decision. She dresses for herself. But of course, the traditional male view is that women dress to be looked at. That is, they dress for men. And that conflict runs right through contemporary attitudes in Britain. Are women dressing for themselves, or are they dressing to be looked at? And it can be a very provocative and controversial issue of dress. There's a fashion in Britain at present for very, very short skirts, which women say, well, I like it that way. And of course, men have a different reaction. Well, another issue that certainly continues is the question of violence between the men and women, domestic violence. Sadly, here, as in many other countries, is a big issue. It was an issue that was made worse by the pandemic, by COVID. People locked up together. Violence from man to woman is totally unacceptable in the social world in which I move. But it occurs. Another area of issue is the question of language. I talked a bit about gender. And there is a struggle at present in Britain over what is called political correctness, whether it is required in society to say the right things and not say the wrong things, or whether you are actually free to speak what you want to say. And this centers around what it is permissible to say in public about women, or indeed other groups in society. But we're talking about women. And the last issue I would raise is that as what is called the emancipation of women, the achievement of a social framework that gives women equality, has that emancipation caused a problem for men, a problem of masculinity? Have they thereby lost their sense of self-respect, or of habits of life that have given them a feeling of purpose and worth? Now, my own view about this is that the issues are to do with very general ones, to do with how we treat other people. And for me, the issues are of treating everybody, children, women, with respect. And if there is a presumption, if you start from the basis of respect for all people, then you can see that the problems of women's position in society and the changes are practical problems. Of course, there are issues of care of children, but they are practical issues to do with the kinds of social arrangements that we want. And the questions of whether you are a man or a woman become secondary to the question of whether you have respectful relations. So let me finish on that point. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. And probably, that was an extremely profound lecture. Well, it was so detailed and historically founded, and as usual, very well organized. And thank you very much for your personal observations, which were very, very interesting. Well, probably there are some questions that people would like, the people who join us would like to ask you. Well, anybody who would like to ask a question, please?
May I start?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Please.
I would like to ask you one question. How do you think the world would have looked like if the women had not been given the rights and the choice they have today?
What an entertaining question. What would it have looked like? I think it would look like firstly, I think it would be boring, and because we would have lost the diversity that women provide, the differences. We're all different, and I think that difference is a huge strength and source of richness. But what would it look like? It would look like we could find traditional societies in which women are indeed entirely subservient to men in legal and religious terms. And it would look like that, wouldn't it? That they would not be publicly visible. They would be only active in private. Does that answer your question?
All right, thank you very much. Well, anybody else would like to ask a question, please?
I have a question.
Yes,
what do you think about very late waves of feminism, about 4 or even 5 waves? Maybe once, for example, new patriarchat system, but based on feminism, because they have more and more power with time.
I don't know about different waves of feminism. I'm not sure. The phrase is used to try in debates about different positions. So I think people use these terms differently. Everybody talks about second wave feminism. This is clear that there was a very definite movement at the end of the 60s and through the 70s. That's second wave feminism. Later waves are diverse, I think. I'm not clear in what sense these waves have power. Changes have taken place, and they have power in the sense that there is now an Equal Opportunities Act. This is power. To have achieved that kind of legislation. It is indeed power. And there are many women politicians, but and some of them have had power. but it's not at all clear that any particular wave of feminism has particular power. It seems to me that they've achieved what they've achieved by gradual changes within society.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
yeah, thank you. Anybody else would like to ask a question? I've got a question to ask you, if I may. Well, what about Dickens? Charles Dickens, who was the greatest writer of the probable times, and well, I love him dearly, and I think he's one of the greatest. And what do you think about? Well, he was very sympathetic to women. Well, do you think that his books and his fiction will somehow really had an impact on the latest developments in the in the part that women played in society at the time, please? The 19th century,
Yes.
the second part of the 19th century. Yes, please.
I think that novelists, and Dickens is a fine example, have played a very important part, because in many of these novels, and particularly in Dickens, people of all kinds, children, workers, aristocrats, women, are portrayed as human beings. And they differ in Dickens. He certainly differs. His characters differ, men and women, but he gives them a shared humanity. And it's that I think that is a very important dimension in the gradual emancipation of women, is that it is you would find it hard now to make an argument that somehow women do not belong to the human species. And that's to do not just with campaigns by women, but to do with the general humanization of society, with what I would call the growth of respect for individuals. And that, again, is bound up with spreading political, democratic questions. So, yes. I think the novels, I mean, a lot of novelists, it is a fact, are women now. And an argument might be made that women are more of a social conscience than men, that it is their concern with the emotional dimensions of the world that comes out in literary writing. It's one important way in which they do have influence, I think, as a group.
Thank you very much. Well, there is any other question that people would like to ask you? Anybody? So I have got, if I may, yes, please go ahead.
As we've touched upon the topic of literature, I would like to ask another question. Which pieces would you recommend to read about this topic?
What would I? Goodness, I haven't prepared an answer to that question. I do read a number of women writers. I've been reading recently a modern English writer called A.S. Byatt. She died not long ago. Byatt is spelled Byatt, Byatt, A.S. Byatt. She wrote her best-known novel was called Possession, and it's about Victorian society. But she portrays in her novels history of an educated woman in the modern period, in the novel I've been reading. And it's very much to do with the woman acquiring an education, and through the education demanding a position of equality with men, not being willing to take a role alongside, but demanding that her brilliance, intelligence be recognized. But there have been other novels by feminists which are was a woman in the 70s and 80s called Faye Weldon, Faye Weldon. And she wrote novels about women taking revenge on men that when you know, in typical situations of divorce and of conflict where relationships don't work out, she had women not just accepting that things had gone wrong, but women standing up and saying, it's you men who made it go wrong. That is, it's not just you, but it's men in general who made it go wrong. And so there's a genre of that kind of writing. There's also a genre of women's writing about how women from very ordinary backgrounds, you know, without any special advantages, have succeeded in making a place for themselves in the world. And that often links up with romance. It has the theme of romance, from rags to riches, but through the capacities of a woman. And that's a genre of writing that's very widely read, the rags to riches story of women.
I see.
Thank you very much. Well, another question anybody could like to ask. Well, then, would you
Yes.
please, Professor, you mentioned that, you said that there is a prediction that in a short while, probably most of bishops will be women. Well, how can you account for this really odd fact?
Why is it an odd fact?
Well, but it is not. You said it isn't an odd fact. So, but, well, why? It has been always a tradition that, it was different.
Yes, it's interesting. I can only speculate, but it is the fact that the churches have become social institutions which show care, are concerned with the well-being of people, not with making money. And the contrast between the making of money and care of people is, of course, a traditional contrast between the man and the woman. The man makes the money and the woman does the caring. And so that in the churches, women have, and they would say, discovered the strengths of what women can offer to society. Instead of it just being limited to the family, these strengths, they are a central social contribution.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, and then, anybody else would like to ask a question? Then, probably, if you allow me to ask this one. About assertiveness. You said that women have become assertive. Well, what do you mean by assertiveness? Well, is it something like American women's lib? Well, is it something like that, or is it different in a way?
No, it takes assertiveness, by which mean people are willing to, are confident to put themselves forward, to take this, confident to take decisions, confident in asking that people do what they want done. That kind of assertiveness can take many different forms, surely. So it can be aggressive, do what I ask, you know, or it can be very gentle in terms of a confidence that if they talk quietly over a long period of time, people will see that they are right. And a lot of women have become social contributors in a quiet way of talking. It isn't at all aggressive, but it is assertive in that it is not saying, the woman is starting from the position that I have thought and have felt and do know what is needed. Instead of saying, I'm dependent upon a man's judgment, I've arrived at my own judgment.
Well, thank you very much. And what about the choice that some entrepreneur would like to make because of the act about equal opportunity? Well, he's was supposed to take on a woman. Well, where probably he would like to take a man. Well, how would it really develop the situation? and well, how would what would his decision be? Well, because there is always a choice to take either a man or a woman, and probably his preference goes to men, mostly in most cases. But how well is it not in contradiction to what is the act of equal opportunity?
Yes, yes, it is, and there are provisions in the act so that if a woman feels that she has not been treated equally, and she can take it to court.
Oh,
There are ways in which a person who is employing people has to demonstrate that they have treated people equally. And universities, for example, are very, very elaborate, complicated performances they go through before they appoint a new person to show that among the candidates for a position, they have chosen the best person.
oh, thank you very much. Well, anybody else could like to ask a question? I think we should call it a day. And thank you very much for this absolutely brilliant lecture. And because it was so profound and so subtle at the same time, and it has given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much, Professor. And we do hope that probably you might find some time and come over again, in the second term of the current school year. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure for me to take part, and I wish you all warm. I send my good wishes to everybody.
Thank you very much indeed. And that's the end of our communication at the moment, I think. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, to all those who helped you, who are around you. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you and goodbye at this point.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank
you
you.
very much for your profound
Свидания.
lecture and for your answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. До свидания.
Well, yes. Well, your Russian, hasn't evaporated. We see.
Нет, я еще говорю немножко.
Your Russian is very good indeed. Well, as I remember. Thank you and goodbye. Goodbye.